Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. We now have all the cards for Outlaws of Thunder Junction previewed. We've seen them all. We know what's coming. I already did a standard video in which I look at what I believe are going to be the top 10 cards, so make sure to check that out on my channel. Now it's time for the Big Score full set review. Big Score is what was supposed to be kind of like the epilogue set, like Aftermath, but now is getting released alongside Outlaws of Thunder Junction. These cards are going to be inside the packs that are going to be in the standard playable stuff. So Big Score is standard playable. Big Score will be in your packs for draft, etc. Big Score is a 30 card Mythic only set. So that's why I'm going to look at them separately and review the whole set. I'm going to be looking at them from a standpoint of standard, limited, commander, basically every format that I'm familiar with, and I might make some comments towards formats that I'm slightly less familiar with, but have a general idea. So let's just review these cards, and we're going to start right off with the first one in the set, and that is Collector's Cage. It's 1 and a white for artifacts with Hideaway 5. You tap it for 1, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. And if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, you may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost. So Hideaway is that you look at the top X cards, in this case 5, of your library, and you exile 1 face down underneath this card. So Collector's Cage, you play it, you hide away 5, look at the top 5 cards of your library, grab 1, put it underneath Collector's Cage, and if you meet that requirement, you get to play it for free. That's pretty strong in this case for really only 2 mana. That's not a lot. You can activate this once on turn 3 or 4, probably 4 based on how many creatures you have to have. Technically, by turn 4, you should be able to play the Hideaway 5 card. So whatever that may be, could be incredibly broken, could also be not that great. Just kind of depends on what's in the top 5 of your deck. It's very easy to whiff on something like that. But the requirement is not that hard. Also, the ability is something that you can keep doing. This card doesn't disappear when that happens. So for 1 and tapping, you put a counter on a creature you control. That's a pretty strong ability. That's really not bad, especially if you're like in a green-white scales deck that wants to put a lot of counters on things. This is not a bad card. It's a little slow, and you can definitely whiff on the Hideaway 5. So for that standpoint, I really only see this being played in Commander, and it might be decent in Limited because there is a skills theme in Limited. I think it is the green-white that really focuses on the +1/+1 counter. So Hideaway 5 is not necessarily great in Limited because, yeah, it could be card advantage, but again, the top 5 you could very easily whiff. I'm not going to say it's nothing. It's a great perk. It's a great extra, but don't count on Hideaway 5 to win you the game. But just that for 1 mana and tap, so 1 mana and once per turn, putting a +1/+1 counter on something, that's pretty decent. And if you get an extra card out of it, that's great. So Limited, and for Commander, this could be a decent card. I don't think this is standard playable at all. Grand Abolisher, white and a white for a creature human cleric. It's a 2/2. During your turn, your opponents can't cast spells or activate abilities of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. This is a great hate card. I see this being mostly played in just mono white or possibly white with one other color, just to make sure that you can meet that requirement of the white and a white. This feels very much like the Soldier's card for 4 mana. I think it's Loran. No, not Loran. I don't remember her name. But anyway, the 4 mana Soldier that doesn't allow your opponent to activate stuff on their turn. This is pretty solid. It's also on a Cleric, which is a relevant body for a lot of decks, like Angels, Clerics, that kind of stuff. During Standard, it might be a sideboard card. I don't know. I don't think there's really that much that this benefits against. But this is another great card to be played in Commander. I believe it's a reprint. Not 100% sure on that. If so, then it's just a great way to reduce the cost on a creature like this. Cards like that are just good in stacks decks. I don't foresee this being playable in Standard or Limited at the moment. Oltec Matter Weaver, 2 and a white for a creature human artificer. It's a 2/4. Whenever you cast a creature spell, choose 1. Create a 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature token. Create a token that's a copy of target artifact token you control. This can get pretty nuts in the right build. You'll be casting a lot of creature spells in white, typically, unless you play control. And every time you do that, you get to put a little token on the board. Which, if you're in a token deck, this matters because you'll play a creature, you create a token. That's always a good little perk. Or creating a token that's a copy of target artifact token you control. So if you already have strong artifact tokens, then this can make it stronger yet. So like think of the constructs that get really big. There's a couple in standard even that they're constructs that get stronger based on how many permanents you control, non-land permanents. And then Ultec Matter Weaver would allow you to make tokens of those. So Ultec Matter Weaver is pretty strong with that. I think it can really go wide quickly. Um, and it can also make copies of target artifact tokens you control. The only thing that's kind of a bummer, in my opinion, is that it makes gnomes, because gnomes don't trigger a Neem Pakal, and that's really a great card to benefit off of going wide with a lot of creatures attacking with a lot of stuff. So still, Ultec Matter Reaver seems really, really good in the right build. It can do some cool stuff, especially if you start copying like bigger constructs, bigger artifact tokens. Even if you put it in an Eternal format and you copy like the bigger tokens that come back from what's the name? The worm that's for 6 manas that comes back with a 3/3 and a 3/3. Making copies of those, that's pretty cool. So you can also do some busted stuff if you have other things in your deck that make tokens of non-token creatures, and then you can play Ultec Matter or with Ultec Matter Weaver on the board, you play another creature and you create a token of one of those that sticks on the board because typically those kinds of effects sacrifice it at the end of turn. So there's some stuff you can do with this that make it really interesting, make it really fun. I think it's definitely a commander card. In limited, it can be decent if you have a lot of creature spells because then you just go wide, which is there's nothing wrong with that. So limited, it could be really good. Commander, it seems like it could be a cool card. Standard, I think it's a little too clunky. I definitely don't think this is a mythic. This set, in my opinion, has a lot of mythics that are just mythic for this, just so that they can be a mythic in the set. This is one of those cards that I don't think should be a mythic. This could be an uncommon, in my opinion, but maybe a rare at best, kind of like Torn. A rare at best, in my opinion. Decent card, mostly for Commander and Limited. Rest in Peace, 1 and a white for an enchantment. When Rest in Peace enters the battlefield, exile all graveyards. If a card or token would be put in the graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. This is a fantastic reprint. I know a lot of people have been waiting for this, especially in the current state of Standard, where you have that Teamer deck that just wants to play a lot of lands from the graveyard. When you have the Demir deck, I forget the name of the card, but it's a 4-mana card that allows you to play stuff back from your graveyard that ends the graveyard that turn. Against Breach the Multiverse, there's just so much stuff that this is really good against. So Rest in Peace. If you're playing white, this will probably go in your sideboard in Standard going forward. We already know how it does in the older formats. It's a really solid sideboard card in every format it can be played in. So this is an incredible reprint. I didn't think it was a mythic. Maybe it was. I don't remember. But again, like I said, this set just makes everything mythic, so it is what it is. Let's not look at that too much. That's just going to hurt for those of us that are playing Arena and want to craft these. Luckily, I already have the other Rest in Peace, but oh well. Esoteric Duplicator. 2 and a blue for an artifact clue. Whenever you sacrifice Esoteric Duplicator, that name is really hard for me for some reason, or another artifact, you may pay 2. If you do, at the beginning of the next end step, create a token that's a copy of that artifact. For 2 mana, sacrifice Esoteric Duplicator, draw a card. So this is cool. This is a recurring artifact sacrifice engine. With this, and I like that this is a clue because there's a lot of cards in Standard that matter, that care about clues or sacrificing clues. Like Prof, for example. Prof can sacrifice this and gain a lot of like life and card draw, and then you pay 2 more into it to just get it back. That's really cool because that's how this effect works: is you sacrifice this or any other artifact, you pay 2 mana, and it just comes back at the next end step as a token copy of that artifact. So really cool way to get recurring benefits from these artifacts that you're sacrificing. I think this could very well become a staple for those kinds of decks, especially in Commander. This set feels very Commander to me because of the more ambitious power level of these cards, of like having a slightly higher mana cost to be a little too clunky in standard and some of the other formats that are really fast. But in like Commander, if you have the mana to sink into it or the time to build it up, it could really go to some really cool things and do some really cool things. I think that's the case with Esoteric Duplicator. Ooh, that came out smooth. Look at that. I'm getting practice on it. I think the case with that card is that it's one of those like you build it in a deck that cares about a lot of artifact tokens. Think of like Tireless Provisioner, think of food decks, think of clue decks, and just allows you to recur these tokens as you sacrifice them for only 2 mana, which in a commander game is not that much. So Esoteric Duplicator is really, really interesting in that kind of deck. Other than that, I don't really think this is. I feel this is too clunky to play anywhere else. But Commander, this is a cool card. I like this a lot. This will be going into some decks that I can think of. Simulacrum Synthesizer. 2 and a blue for an artifact. When Simulacrum Synthesizer enters the battlefield, scry 2. Whenever another artifact with mana value 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. Now, this is cool with the white card I showed earlier that makes token copies of artifact tokens. But again, this card is clunky. It needs buildup. The biggest problem with this card is that when it enters the battlefield, you scry 2, it doesn't do anything else. That's not a lot for 3 mana. And then having to play other artifacts with mana value 3 or greater to start getting these tokens, that's really tough. That's a little too slow. Once it starts rolling, once you start getting a lot and you get those tokens on the board and those tokens get big, it's great, but it's very slow buildup. I could see if you, for some reason, have a draft deck that has multiple artifacts in it, yeah, it could be worth it because then it's going to start like really getting those tokens on the board and really getting some value. And what Scry 2 allows you to really help your draw to get those artifacts when you need them. But gosh, it's a really slow effect. And the fact that Simulacrum Synthesizer doesn't put a token body on the board itself is kind of a crime. For a Mythic, should not enter the battlefield and just scry 2. A Mythic should not enter the battlefield and just scry 2. It should say whenever an artifact with mana value 3 or greater, blah, 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 because then it would count itself. And it really needs to do that to be playable. Because right now it's just a 3 mana scry 2 that potentially gets more bodies over time. Those bodies aren't even that big until you get more artifacts on the board. So, could it see playing Commander? Maybe. But even there, I don't think it's great. Like, if you play an artifact-based deck in Commander, there's a lot of really powerful artifacts. I don't know if you're going to slot this in because it seems so slow. So, I don't think this card will see play in any format. I think this card is a huge miss. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me know. World Walker Helm. 2 and a blue for an artifact. If you would create 1 or more artifact tokens, instead create those tokens plus an additional map token. 1 blue and tap, create a token that's a copy of target artifact token you control. Again, it's kind of clunky. Like, I like getting maps. Maps are great. Being able to crack it for 1 and explore, that's solid. I like that. But it's slow. You paid for 3 mana, it doesn't do anything until you start creating artifact tokens. You pay 2 and tap it, meaning you can only do it once per turn unless you have untap effects, to create a token that's a copy of target artifact token you control. Not just an artifact. It has to be an artifact token. So you're looking at those, whatever you've created before. So you got to create decent artifact tokens to make it worth spending 2 mana. And you've got to like put plenty on the field or on the battlefield to get all those map tokens to make it worth it. That's a lot of mana to put into an artifact card that by itself doesn't really do that much except give you some maps if you get artifact tokens. So you have to have a really strong artifact token theme for this to get any kind of value. And for 3 mana at a mythic slot, that's just bad. Again, maybe I'm wrong. If you have ways to create really busted artifact tokens and you can create copies with that, yeah, then you play this, you activate it, you tap it, you spend 5 mana. 5 mana to make that token. There are better ways in whatever format you want to play this in. So, again, just like the other card, World Walker Helm to me is completely unplayable. Again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm too pessimistic. But for 3 mana and 2 more to activate at Mythic, for an artifact that by itself doesn't really do anything, Unplayable. Greed's Gambit, 3 and a black for an enchantment. When Greed's Gambit enters the battlefield, you draw 3 cards. Gain 6 life, create 3 2/1 black bat creature tokens with fly. At the beginning of your end step, you discard a card, lose 2 life, and sacrifice a creature. When Greed's Gambit leaves the battlefield, you discard 3 cards, lose 6 life, and sacrifice 3 creatures. Yeah, this is my kind of card. This is cool. Um, this is really about how you can try to either close the game or if you have effects that exchange permanent types. So, kind of like if you're in Demir with some trickster effects that allow you to exchange permanents, you play this, get 3 cards, 6 life, 3 tokens, and then you just swap it with your opponent, and then either you destroy it to where they discard 3, lose 6, and sacrifice 3, or they just start getting that passive effect of at the beginning of their end step, discarding a card, losing 2 life, and sacrificing a creature. That by itself is already solid. If you can play this and give it to your opponent, it is absolute gold. It is a fantastic card. If you play this because you feel like you can finish the game like a turn or two later, it's pretty solid. If you can play this and kind of turn the game around and it slowly starts draining you with that second effect, that discard, lose 2, sacrifice, whatever, it could still be decent, and that's where really it's a gambit. But you have to be careful who you play this against because there's a lot of enchantment removal. So if you play this and then your opponent destroys it, you lose all the benefit from it. So it's really it's a cool card. It does a lot of really cool stuff. Where can this see play? I think this can see play in standard. I think in limited this is a bomb. I think in limited this is definitely a bomb with the 3 flyers, gaining 6 life and drawing 3 cards, and then starting to discard a card, lose a life, and sacrifice a creature that same turn. That's still a pretty good effect. You'll still get a really positive effect over this over time. Now, when it gets painful is if you play this and you end up in a bit of a slugfest afterwards and you can't close the game and then your opponent destroys your Greed's Gambit, you're definitely done after that. So it's definitely a Gambit. I like the name of the card. It's very much so. Really cool card. I think it can see play in standard. I just don't know how you would build it yet. Commander, I think this is going to be a really cool card if you have those kinds of like exchange effects. So I can definitely see if you play anything like that, or if you want to build around that, that this is a really cool card for it. So interesting card. I'm curious to see how this one plays out. Harvester of Misery, 3 black and a black for a creature spirit. That's a 5/4. It has menace. When Harvester of Misery enters the battlefield, other creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. Discard Harvester of Misery for 1 and a black. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. This is also my kind of card. I absolutely love this. If you've followed me on Twitter and on here, you know that some of these cards are my favorites. Massacre Girl, Plague Mare, great, the big worm, the 6-mana worm that I just seem to be really bad at names this video, so I apologize. But those kinds of effects are my absolute favorite, and Harvester of Misery does it in a very playable way, allowing you to discard it and for 2 mana and hit an opponent with -2/-2. That's pretty solid. It's not the best removal in the world, but being able to do it if you feel like you're not going to get to your Harvester of Misery for 5 mana, or if you have Reanimator effects, that's really powerful. And that's also what I like about this. Like the reanimation aspect of it is you can discard it, kill a creature, and then bring it back later and kill a bunch of creatures. This is fantastic against like Boros Convoke, against White Weenies, against like some of those decks, or even if you go against a bigger creature deck and you play it and you have a really solid swing against your opponent because blocking is awkward again if all your creatures have -2/-2. So whatever black deck you put this in, it's really solid in multiple ways. I can see this being played in pretty much any deck that wants to run black, for the reason that it has that removal tied to it and it has that potential board wipe attached to it. One thing to keep in mind, other creatures is not your opponent's creatures. So if you have a bunch of small creatures yourself, they will die to this. So that's something to keep in mind. But that's okay. You're playing in black. You probably have other ways to bring them back, whatever it may be. Or you just play bigger creatures. You're a mid-range deck, or even more of a control deck, and this is one of your few creatures. It is a solid attacker with menace, so at a 5/4 for 5 seems fair, not too broken. But all in all, it just really is solid with that discard effect, and then the enter the battlefield effect itself is pretty good against some of the decks that are out there right now. I could see this being played in standard and commander. Limited, it's very very powerful. Limited, it's an absolute bomb with the. It's a big body that can hit for 5 damage with menace, and it has that board wipe slash removal attached to it. So in limited, this is an absolute bomb. Standard, it'll be interesting. In commander, it's just going to be another great slot to remove some of your opponent's stuff. Hostile Investigator, 3 and a black. It's a creature, ogre, rogue, detective, and it's a 4/3. When Hostile Investigator enters the battlefield, target opponent discards a card. Whenever one or more players discard one or more cards, investigate. This ability triggers only once each turn. Really solid effect, honestly. 4 mana seems a little steep, but it has a little big body on it, and it has that clue token attached to it. So this is only gets bad if your opponent doesn't have cards in hand anymore, because then you don't get that clue effect from it. But a 4/3 for 4, that's fair. That's nothing great. It's fair. Entering the battlefield and letting an opponent discard a card, that's pretty solid. It's target opponent, so it triggers crime effects if you have those. And then whenever they discard one or more cards, you get that clue token from the investigate. So that's pretty solid. It's a great way to get some clues on the board if you have other discard effects, which in black is pretty easy to get. If you're in black, you probably play Outlaws, which Outlaws allows you to swing, and your opponent discards a card, you get a clue. So the value gets pretty crazy pretty quick with Hostile Investigator with some of the other black effects. By itself, again, this is one of those cards that should be a mythic. Absolutely not. It should be a rare at best. But again, big score, Wizards of the Coast being like, everything mythic, everything is mythic. What are you going to do? I like this card. I think currently in standard, there's just so much power at the level or at the 4 mana slot. And I don't see this being played in standard. Commander, you've got better options. And then for limited, this can be decent. In limited, if you discard one of your opponent's cards, that can be painful because you don't have that much ways to draw cards in limited typically. And then getting that clue token to where you can draw cards. So you put for 4 mana a 4/3 on the board, an opponent discards a card, and you get a clue token. In limited, this thing is great, honestly. This thing is really, really solid. So that's where I see this being played. I don't see this being played in any other format. Even though the benefits are there for playing it in standard, I really don't think we'll see it until after rotation. Some of the much better 4 drops need to go away before Hostile Investigator will see play. Hate to say it because it's a cool card. I like the effect. Generous Plunder for 1 and a red. It's a creature, human, rogue. It's a 2/2 with menace. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may create a treasure token. When you do, target opponent creates a tapped treasure token. Whenever Generous Plunder attacks, it deals damage to the defending player equal to the number of artifacts they control. It's fun. I like it. So it is kind of like it's decent. Excuse me. A 2/2 with menace for 2 that creates a treasure token at the beginning of your upkeep. That's pretty solid. If it stays on the board for a little bit, it's a great way to ramp into other stuff. This is not really a mono red aggro card because it's a little too slow for it. But if you're playing more like a Gruul mid range or a Rakdos deck that is a little bit more mid range slash aggro, this is really cool because it allows you to ramp. It allows you to give your opponent treasures that they can't tap right away. They have to wait a turn because they're tapped, so they can't use it right away. So otherwise, they could just sack him on the spots to not get the damage. But if this stays on the board, you're creating your treasure tokens. You give your opponent treasure tokens, and when it attacks, it deals damage to those equal to their artifacts, which includes their treasure tokens. So Generous Plunder is a great hate card against artifact decks, but it's also a great way to ramp up yourself. It's a little slow, but it once a turn on your upkeep is pretty decent. If it stays on the board 1, 2, or 3 turns, that's decent amount of value. So this is interesting. I could see it being played in like more of a Rakdos or Grixis deck that needs to get a little bit more value to get ahead. Do I see it in mono red or any aggro deck like that? Absolutely not. But it's a cool card. It has some perks. I'm curious to see how this plays out. Where this sees play. Limited, it's solid, giving you some ramp that can be at any color. So for limited, I think this is a really good pickup. Commander, it could be interesting because of the artifact hate and because you can kind of play it as a group hug deck too, where you create a treasure, and if you want to band together with somebody else, you give them a treasure. So there's ways that you can work together with others. So in Commander, it is a really interesting card. That's really, I don't know if it'll see playing Standard too much. But I'm going to try to build with this because I like it. I think it can help you ramp to some big stuff. So especially in like a Grixis mid-range deck, maybe this is a decent 2-drop to have like a couple copies of. If you have multiple on, it's not legendary, so you can create a bunch of treasure tokens, technically for a turn if you have 4 of these on the board. Am I living in Disneyland right now? Yes, I'm just telling you what's possible, all right? So, Generous Plunder, there's potential. I'm curious to see what people will do with this card. Legion Extruder, 1 in a red for an artifact. When Legion Extruder enters the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to any target. I apologize, I was just choking on my coffee. For 2 mana, tap it, sacrifice another artifact, create a 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature token. So for 2 mana, it deals 2 damage to any target, which is net 1 mana, a little too slow, but it's a decent effect. Now for 2 mana and tap, sacrifice another artifact, and you get a 3/3 colorless golem. That's pretty solid. 3/3s are decent bodies. For 2 mana, once per turn, sacrificing an artifact to create that is pretty good. By itself, not that great. Because again, the 2 damage for 2 mana is not great, but it's a decent effect for that additional costing. You can do it right away if you have 4 mana. So you play this, and you throw 2 more into it, tap it, sacrifice a blood token, turn it into a 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature token. I think this could see play in Standard because of Anvil. Anvil is one of my favorite cards. Anvil is, even though Temporary Lockdown is one of the most played removal spells right now, and it just absolutely wrecks Anvil, I still have a lot of success with Anvil decks. And Legion Extruder is just a great card to have in there because it has that small removal attached to it, or just damage to the face, whatever. Um, and you can really put some beefier creature tokens on the board where typically you just have those 1/1s that really don't do that much except for just be sacrifice fodder for the animals. So Legion Extruder is just a really great way to beef up your Anvil deck if you want some bigger bodies on the board and to have that damage attached to it. Also, typically, like some of the Anvil decks that I've been playing include that red god in there that deals more damage based on its power level. So it has 4 power when it comes to the board. So then you would play this and it would deal 4 damage instead. So the builds that this would go in, which is mainly Anvil, it's really, really good. And for that reason, I think this will see play in Standard because Anvil is a really powerful deck that is incredibly underplayed right now. Anvil can outgrind any deck, in my opinion. Anvil, to me, is one of the best decks in Standard, but it just doesn't see a lot of play. It's not popular. Legion Extruder is really great for that deck. It's also pretty solid for Commander, and it is incredibly good for Limited. If you have any kind of artifact tokens, which there's a decent amount, you still have the clues and stuff. Well, not in this set, maybe, but there's still, like, in Standard, a lot of other artifacts that this can benefit from. In one thing to note in Limited is if you pick this up, that it sacrifices another artifact. So you can't sacrifice Legion Extruder to itself to create that 3/3 body. Whereas, like with Anvil, you can sacrifice its own Anvil. But with Legion Extruder, you can't do that. That's something of note is you really have to have that other artifact to get that 3/3 body on the board. But other than that, it's a pretty solid card. I think it definitely sees play in Standard. I could see it being played in some of the older formats as well, like Explorer maybe. But yeah, other than that, a really powerful card. I like this a lot. I'll play this for sure in Standard. I don't know if it's good enough for Commander. It might be a little too low of a power level there. Memory Vessel, 3 red for an artifact. Tap, exile Memory Vessel. Each player exiles the top 7 cards of their library. Until your next turn, players may play cards they exile this way, and they can't play cards from their hand. Activate only as a sorcery. This is interesting. This is, I think this is a really decent way to refill your hand in a way. Mostly where I think Memory Vessel shines is if you have a deck that cares about playing stuff from exile. So if you're like in the Discover type decks that have Quintorius that pings people if you play stuff from exile, or if you have cards that get +1/+1 counters because you play stuff from exile, Memory Vessel is pretty solid there. Other than that, it feels a little clunky for 5 mana. That's a lot. But again, you're looking at the top 7 cards, and it's not like you're discarding your hand. So yeah, it's interesting. If you know what your opponent has in their hand and you don't want them to play it next turn, this is also a great thing to crack. But again, you're giving everybody access to 7 cards. That's a little scary. I unless you really care about playing stuff from exiles or you're desperate, which I don't know why you would put this in your deck just to be desperate. I don't see this being that great. Maybe I'm wrong, but also activate only as a sorcery. Well, granted, it doesn't cost any mana to play it. I find it awkward. And it's until your next turn, players may play cards they exiled this way. So everybody only gets to 1 turn to go at it with those top 7 cards. So to me, this is a bit of a odd card. I have a hard time grading this. I don't see why I would put this in any of my decks unless I play like Quintorius, Lelia, and other cards or Pia that really care about putting stuff from exile onto the battlefield. Also, the New Kellen. The New Kellen does that too. Okay, this could be cool with the New Kellen. However, you can't play cards from your hand, and that's what Kellen wants to do. So yeah, no, that doesn't work. It's a weird card. Let me know in the comments what you think. I have a hard time. I can't really grade this card. I don't understand it very well. I don't understand why you would want to do this unless you are Pia, Lelia, or Quintorius. Let me know in the comments. Molten Duplication, 1 in red for sorcery. Create a token that's a copy of target artifact or creature you control, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It gains haste until end of turn. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Wow, this thing is cool. For 2 mana, creating a token of any of your artifacts or creatures. Except it's an artifact in addition to its types. Whatever. It gains haste and you sacrifice at the beginning of end step. So basically, for 2 mana, you can create a copy of your Atali that can then swing in. However, Legend Rule still applies, but you get that enter the battlefield effect. Same with Atraxa. Legend Rule applies, you still have that enter the battlefield effect. For 2 mana, that's pretty cool. So basically, it's a blink effect in those cases. If you put it on a non-legendary creature, that just means you can swing in for more with a powerful creature that might have a strong into the battlefield effect. Molten Duplication, really cool card that does some really cool stuff. If you do this on one of the gods, then maybe you can put it your original as a land and then swing with it. Yeah, this is a cool card. I think you can really play with this as a enter the battlefield card or just a way to get extra attacks in with a big creature and then sacrificing at the beginning for the next end step that allows you to also use other sacrifice effects first. It is an artifact in addition to its other types, so for Anvil lovers like myself, you can make a copy of your whatever, Blood Tithe Harvester, whatever you have in play. At that point, it's not the best, but again, you target this with your Blood Tithe Harvester, you get another Blood token, you get another Blood Tithe Harvester. The Blood Tithe Harvester in itself isn't going to be an artifact. You swing with it. If they block it, then you just sacrifice it with your Anvil, and you get all those triggers. So even if you play it in a more fair magic kind of way, instead of making copies of your Atali or Atraxa, whatever nasty stuff you can do, it is still really powerful. Molten Duplication, I think, will definitely see play in a lot of formats that care about those kinds of things. Really great in Commander, really great in Standard. We'll see where else it plays out. Probably the one deck that I don't really, or the one format I don't want to play this in is Limited, because you just typically don't have that much strong power level on the board. You just kind of try to go with what you have. I don't know if you want to make a copy of something for 2 mana and sacrifice at the end of turn, unless you have a sacrifice effect theme going on. So, but Standard, Commander, and possibly some of the older formats, Molten Duplication is really powerful. I like this a lot. It's one of the mythics that I'm actually like, hey, that should be a mythic. Territory Forge, 4 in a red for an artifact. When Territory Forge enters the battlefield, if you cast it, exile target artifact or land. Territory Forge has all activated abilities of the exiled card. Gross. Land removal. I hate it. 5 mana is a lot. But if you can play this with a discount, if you have like artifact discounts, you can typically play this for 4 mana, like Urza, if you have like a Jeskai artifact deck. I don't know if you would do that, but you could. Yeah, with that being said, this can do some gross stuff. If you have artifact copy stuff, you can just start. Oh, wow. Let's go back. Molten Duplication, you can make a copy of it. Yeah. At that point, will only have the activated abilities for one turn, but for 2 mana, you exile a land. That's just gross. So Territory Forge, I think it's going to be mainly interesting in like Commander, where you want to exile lands or artifacts and have those activated abilities. That's typically where it's most powerful. I think it's a little too slow for Standard, but if you have an interaction like Territory Forge into multi-duplication, you can really strip your opponents from lands quickly, which is disgusting. Please don't do that, but it's the thing you can do. I think this is mainly a Commander card. Yeah, I don't see this being that great in Standard, but it could be if you target a creature land with it, then you can attack with Territory Forge as a creature land, and you strip your opponent from a land. So you're netting one land against your opponent, basically two at that point. Yeah, it's a decent card, mainly Commander. Please don't Territory Forge into multi duplication though. That's gross. Ancient Cornucopia, 2 and a green for an artifact. Whenever you cast a spell that's one or more colors, you may gain 1 life for each of those spells' colors. Do this only once each turn. Tap, add 1 mana of any color. Yeah, I mean, this could build up to being some decent life gain. If you have a life gain deck that runs green, this could be worth it if you have multiple. Like, at least it'll be a trigger turn when you cast a spell. Other than that, for 3 mana dork, or a mana artifact, mana rock, whatever, that gets you some life. Should that be Mythic? Probably not. I think Celestis is still better. At least you get the card draw from it. So unless you really care about life gain or you're really scared about life, Ancient Cornucopia is not great. Could it be decent in Domain against like a Boros Convoke deck? I still think it's too slow. Because it's only once per turn. So even if you play this and then you, gosh, even in Domain, you don't play that many multicolored spells. So unless you play Atrox and you gain 4 life off of it, it's still not great. It's too slow. Ancient Cornucopia Unless you really care about life gain, this card is not great. That's all I got to say about it. Is it good in limited? It's a mana rock that can add 1 mana of any color. So in limited, sure. If you play 3 colors, throw in Ancient Cornucopia for mana fixing. Other than that, I think this card is really bad. I don't think this will see play in any format unless you really care about life gain. But even then, there's typically better cards. This card is another miss for me. Bristlebud Farmer, 2 green for a creature plant druid. It's a 5/5 with trample. When Bristlebud Farmer enters the battlefield, create 2 food tokens. Whenever Bristlebud Farmer attacks, you may sacrifice a food. If you do, mill 3 cards. You may put a permanent card from among them into your hand. This card is fantastic. I like this a lot. 4 mana, 5/5 with trample. Those are already really solid stats. It creates the 2 food tokens upon entering the battlefield. That's also really solid. So you basically, for 4 mana, get a 5/5 trampler and 2 food tokens. Then you get to attack with it. If you don't have any other ways to create food tokens, as long as you get to attack with it twice, in total, you're milling 3 cards twice and putting a permanent card from among them into your hand. It could be a land, could be a creature, could be an artifact, enchantment, whatever that may be. It is really solid card advantage. Even if this enters the battlefield, it gets removed on the spot, at least you still have the 2 food tokens, and you took a removal spell out of your opponent's hand. All in all, really solid card. I think if you play green mid-range, Bristlebud Farmer has a really solid spot in it. Again, Standard is stacked, 4 mana is stacked, but a 5/5 Trampler that could get you some card advantage could very well get a spot in some of those decks. I like this card a lot. It's card advantage on a 5/5 Trampler that kind of rewards you for being aggressive. I'm all for that. So I like this card a lot. I think it'll see some play in Standard. This thing is a house in Limited unless it gets removed right away, but you still have 2 food tokens, which nets life gain, artifacts that could be other triggers, whatever it may be. And in Commander, also, again, Commander cares about foods, cares about card advantage, cares about milling if you're in green, possibly green-black. I think this card is a winner in a lot of formats. Standard, Commander, Limited, maybe even some of the older formats that I'm not too sure about. But Bristlebud Farmer, I like it a lot. I think it's very, very powerful. It helps you seek cards too, so it might even go in like Abzent Yawgmoth in the older formats. So, yeah, cool card. I like this a lot. I'll definitely be playing this in Standard for sure, at least. Omen Path Journey, 3 and a green for an enchantment. When Omen Path Journey enters the battlefield, search your library for up to 5 land cards that have different names. Exile them, then shuffle. At the beginning of your end step, choose a card at random exiled with Omen Path Journey and put it onto the battlefield tapped. So basically what this says, in my opinion, is It's a very, very, very slow 4 mana ramp card. It is so much worse than playing for 4 mana and getting two basics on the board. Because you have to wait till your end step to put one of them on the board. You might even just pick one land. So you tutor one land for 4 mana, you put it on the board just to make sure that you get the land that you want. Where this just gets really bad is if you play for 4 mana and you get the lands that you really want to advance your game and your opponent destroys his. And then your lands are just gone in exile, alongside Omen Path Journey being in a graveyard or exile. This card is a trap. I don't see why you would ever want to play this. I would stay away from this card. This card is a trap. Are there scenarios where it could play out? Absolutely. Is it worth the gamble? Absolutely not. Do not play this card, even though the art of this card is really cool. It's really cute. Jason Vraska, if you've read the story, they adopted a little small child that is the power to everything because they want to try to make their relationship work and fix their errors from the past. That doesn't sound like it'll go wrong at all, everybody. That sounds totally fine. Normal couples do that kind of stuff. Let's go to the next card. Sandstorm Salvager, 2 and a green for a creature, Human Artificer. It's a 1/1. When Sandstorm Salvager enters the battlefield, create a 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature token. For 2 mana, tap, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature token you control. They gain trample until end of turn. Woo, this is actually pretty good. 3 mana 1/1 that puts a 3/3 body on the board when it enters the battlefield. Q flicker effects, Q effects to create copies of Sandstorm Salvager, and then Q all the effects to make copies of your tokens. That gets pretty nuts. This thing goes wide quick. This thing allows you to put counters on all your creature tokens and they gain trample until end of turn. So instead of just going wide and getting chump blocked, you go wide, make all your stuff bigger, and they have trample and they just swing and attack. Sandstorm Salvager is going to be a staple in green flicker decks, green token decks, so green, white, jet mirror, that kind of stuff. I think this card is really, really powerful. I can definitely see this being a thing in, like, maybe standard is going to see more of a Naya. Um, Naya, like standard could have more of a Naya build with this. So, War Leader's Call with Sandstorm Salvager and a bunch of creature tokens. I think this is really powerful. I think this could really make people want to pivot into green for more of the go wide strategies. There is going to be a lot of hate coming for like small creature decks, but Sandstorm Salvager is really powerful and really explosive with the +1/+1 counters on the creatures with the trample and that kind of stuff. I like this card a lot in multiple formats. I think this will see play in like standard. I think this is great in commander. Limited, it's incredibly powerful, especially if you have ways to make copies of Sandstorm Salvager or copies of the artifact creature tokens, which we see in big score there's a lot of. So all in all, really cool card. I like this a lot. It's pretty powerful. Vaultborn Tyrant, 5 green green for a creature dinosaur. It's a 6/6 with trample. Whenever Vaultborn Tyrant or another creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 3 life and draw a card. When Vaultborn Tyrant dies, if it's not a token, create a token that's a copy of it, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. That's super powerful, honestly. This is one of those that it ends the battlefield, you gain 3 life, you draw a card, it's 6/6 trample, and then if you don't exile it, that stuff happens again. It ends the battlefield, you draw a card, gain 3 life, and anytime you have other creatures with power 4 or greater, which in green there's quite a few, if you didn't know. So Vaultborn Tyrant is really powerful in that. I think for standard, having a 7 mana creature, unless you have a way to cheat it in, is a little too slow. But there's quite a few ways to cheat this in. I also like this. If you play this, either you cheat it in. Let's say you play like a junk build. You cheat this in, then you use that 2 mana sorcery to make a copy of it. Now the copy, when it dies, will not trigger the second effect, but still, the 3 life, drawing a card, and you got a 6/6 with trample and haste at that point. It's very powerful. Vaultborn Tyrant is a really good target for reanimator decks. It's a really good target for copying stuff. And also, just if you play Green Stompy, this is still pretty solid with that effect of the drawing a card and gaining 3 life anytime a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield. So this is a cool card. I can see this being played in multiple formats for that reason. Probably not necessarily the older formats. It's a little too slow for that, but for like standard, this is great. Limited, this is a fantastic bomb. In limited, this thing is a I win card. Not necessarily, but you know what I mean. It's very hard to deal with. You have to exile it, or it's just going to run away with the game. Um, and then obviously in Commander, this is a great card. Like there's a lot of really powerful cards in green in those in that mana slot, if you will. But I think this can definitely replace some of those simply because of how powerful it is, and with that card draw attached to it. Very powerful card. I like this a lot. Great design. Loot, the key to everything. Green, blue, red for legendary creature Beast Noble. It's a 1/2, and it has Ward 1. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of card types among other non-land permanents you control. You might play those cards this turn. So it has to be other non-land, among other non-land permanents you control, so it can't be loot. So alongside loot, you're going to want to have like an artifact, enchantment, creature. Is there anything else? I think that's it. So maximum of 3, or battle 4, maximum of 4 that you exile at the beginning of your upkeep. So that's really cool in Commander. That's really the only place you'll play this. This is way too slow in Standard. Ward 1 is solid, but it's not that great because it still dies to cut down. So for 2 mana, loot is gone. And then at that point, it was 3 mana for absolutely nothing. Uh, so yeah, this is a commander card. That's all this is. It's probably going into command zone as something you build around. And at that point, it can be really interesting because basically in Teamer colors, you give yourself pretty solid card advantage where every turn you have 1, 2, or 3 extra cards that you can play. That's really cool. It's a cool effect. I think people also really like the art. They think this thing is cute. I think it's kind of creepy. It looks like the Cheshire Cat. Also, it is Jason Vraska's kid, so that sounds like a problem. Um, but from that standpoint, it's a commander. I will build it because it looks cool. Probably not in paper, probably just in Brawl because Teamer gets expensive. But I mean, it's a cool little card. It's a Teamer good stuff card. That's really all I can say about this. This is not really playable in anything else. I would not play this in limited because 3 color fixing is pretty hard. I would not play this in standard because it's easy to remove and it's just not strong by itself. And then again, you have to have those other permanents on the board to make this worthwhile. So yeah, commander card at best. It's neat as a commander. Pest control, white and a black for sorcery, destroy all non-land permanents with mana value 1 or less, and it has cycling 2. Rip Boros Convoke. Rip any other token deck. Rip all your little artifact tokens and any other token that you could create because on my turn, Pest Control will get rid of all of it. So, luckily, it is a sorcery. Otherwise, this card would be insanely broken. It's already pretty powerful. They make this card really strong by putting that cycling ability on it. That makes it to where, at worst, it's a 2 mana draw card. And at best, it completely devastates your opponent's game plan. Pest Control is a really powerful card. It will see play in every format because it's such a powerful hate card. It's in good colors. Yeah, this card is just an absolute banger. And it's in standard. I think a lot of people are going to put this in their best of 1 decks because, again, it has that cycling 2. So it's not necessarily a hate card that you hate playing in best of 1. In best of 3, it'll probably live in your sideboard more often, but even then, you might keep 1 copy in your main deck depending on what the meta looks like. And then in Commander, it's a great card because you can really blow up all your opponent's mana rocks. If you're in white and black, let's say you're in either Orzhov or Esper, well, not necessarily Esper, they have a lot of artifacts, but if you're in Orzhov, maybe either way, you're not in green and blue. You're not in maybe red that creates a bunch of treasures. You might feel like you're going to start falling behind on some of those like mana rocks that are 1 or 2 mana, or even their treasures or whatever. Pest control, you can just kind of get everybody back at the same level. So pest control is it's a very fair card. No, it's incredibly powerful card. Very powerful. I think this will see being slotted into best of 1 standard until Boros Convo kind of settles down a little bit. Because of that cycling ability, it's very safe to play it there. And then in best of 3 formats, I think this will see play in every format. This will go in all the sideboards that play these colors because it is so powerful. Very good card. Lost Jitte. I think I'm pronouncing that completely wrong. For 1, colorless. Legendary artifact equipment. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage, put a charge counter on Lost Jitte. Remove a charge counter from Lost Jitte. Choose 1. Untap target land. Target creature can't block this turn. Put a +1/+1 counter on equipped creature and equip it for 1 mana. Yeah, Lost Jitte. Yeah. I don't know. This is kind of an odd card. So 2 mana to get it on a creature. Then you need to deal combat damage to get a charge counter. Once you have a charge counter, you can remove a charge counter to untap a land to make a target creature not block or put a +1/+1 counter on a equipped creature. This thing is super slow. Super slow. And you have to do damage before it does anything. It doesn't give any kind of evasion, so you have to put on something with evasion. Yeah, this is another one of those cards that should not be a mythic. Rare at best, even that would be questionable. Now, being able to untap a land is good. Being able to make something not block is good. Putting a counter on something is pretty good. So those abilities are not bad. It's just trying to get there. This card would have been good if it came on with a charge counter. If it enters the battlefield with a charge counter to where then you can immediately activate it and start basically getting kind of that balance of, okay, I remove a charge counter to get a charge counter and I can keep recurring those effects. But the fact that it doesn't do anything at first, and at first it's just a 2 mana do nothing, makes it really bad. To me, this is unplayable. Yeah, I don't see where you would want to play this card. There's a lot of good equipments out there. I would not play it Lost Jitte unless you have an equipment deck and you want to put another cheap equipment in and you already have some evasion. Yeah, maybe. But other than that, this card just doesn't. It's a 2 mana do nothing, and there's a good chance that it will never do anything. Yeah, I don't see it being played anywhere. Lotus Ring 3 for an artifact equipment. Indestructible. Equipped creature gets +3/+3 and has vigilance and tap. Sacrifices creature at 3 mana of any one color. Equipped for 3. Um, yeah, this is another one of those. Like if you're in an equipment deck, it's decent. It has indestructible, which is nice. You can use this as like ramp for later on because you can. Gosh, equipping it is 6 mana though. Played for 3, then you equip it for 3. +3/+3 vigilance is not that great of an upside, and then sacrifice to add 3 mana of any one color. Unless you really need to mana fixing later on, this is kind of garbage. This is way too much mana to invest in an equipment. So will it see play somewhere? I'm sure in an equipment deck if you have like ways to discount your equipments, discount your attaching equipments. In Commander, this could see play somewhere. I'm sure. I'm sure there's a way that this can be broken in Commander. Anywhere else, completely unplayable. Next is up becoming for 6 mana. Artifact at the beginning of combat on your turn. Draw a card. And you may exile an artifact or creature card from your hand. If you do, create a token that's a copy of the exiled card, except it's a 3/3 golem artifact creature in addition to its other types. Potentially really, really powerful. So for 6 mana, basically, now it's at the beginning of combat on your turn. So that's really nice too. It's not a 6 mana do nothing like an entire turn cycle. You can play this on your first main phase, and as you go through your combat phase, you draw a card and then exile an artifact or creature from your graveyard or from your hand. So let's say that's an Atraxa, that's an Atali, like the typical ones that I mentioned when it comes to the strong enter the battlefield effects. And then it's a 3/3 golem artifact. So the stats on the creature itself are not great, but if you have ways to basically exile really powerful cards that are a lot of mana with enter the battlefield, like maybe even the Vault-Born dinosaur thingy, that's also really good with Next Up Becoming because it ends the battlefield. Well, actually, no, that's a terrible card to do with this because it doesn't see itself as a 4 power or greater. Disregard. I didn't say anything about the Vault-Born Tyrant. It's terrible. Don't exile with this. But if you have bigger creatures that benefit from an enter the battlefield effect, it could be really good. It could be really interesting. If you go an entire turn cycle with it, then it gets even better because you basically just draw 2 cards a turn and you get to exile an artifact or creature and put them on the battlefield. This is also really cool with Portal. For 6 mana, you put Portal on the board. That's a 3/3 golem, and it makes your opponent sacrifice 3 creatures, and then you can start reanimating stuff. So I actually like it a lot better with Portal. I just thought of that. So there's definitely ways to make this pretty broken. You can also cheat Indexes of Becoming. by having it in the graveyard and bringing it back with some of those white artifact reanimator effects. So next up becoming is really cool. I think there's definitely ways to have kind of more of a janky standard decks that can potentially pop off really big with this. Commander, this could be really, really powerful. So next up becoming is really, really quite interesting. I like it a lot. I probably wouldn't play this in limited. Well, in limited could be good too because in limited it's just the extra card draw alone that makes it worth it, and you can turn like one of your smaller creatures into 3/3 golem. So yeah, limited it's pretty good too. Yeah, this is a card that has a lot of potential. I don't think this will ever be a tier 1 card, maybe not even tier 2, but in limited it's pretty solid. In Commander, it could be really broken, and then in Standard, there's some really, really crazy stuff you can do with it too. So, yeah, this will see play. I wouldn't be surprised if you see this come across on the ranked ladder from time to time, and I wouldn't be surprised if it kind of blows your socks off when it does. It's a pretty powerful card. It definitely has a lot of potential. I wouldn't necessarily go out of my way to craft a bunch of these, but if you pull one out of a pack, try some stuff with it. It could surprise you. Sword of Wealth and Power. For 3 mana artifact equipment, equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from instants and from sorceries. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. When you next cast an instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. Equip 2. Um, this is actually pretty good. It basically says that your creature gets protection from instant sorceries, so it basically has hexproof, except against like planeswalkers and other creatures. And when it deals combat damage, creating a treasure token matters, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you copy it. That is really powerful. This is actually a really good effect. Again, it's 5 mana to get it on something, but typically you want to put this a little bit later in the game anyway. Put it on something with flying or evasion or whatever, and then just hit your opponent, cast a Time Warp, cast a Ulrin's Epiphany, cast um, whatever stupid powerful spell you can think of, cast an ultimatum, and it gets copied. And that's really powerful. Any kind of copy effect for free on an instant or sorcery is good. Putting it on a creature that then has +2/+2 and a hexproof from or protection from instants and sorceries is really good. Um, yeah, and then creating a treasure token. The treasure token is probably like the smallest little feat here, or the smallest little bonus. All in all, this is a good sword. Is it the best sword? Probably not, but it's really powerful. And it can do some broken stuff if you build it right. I could see this going in like blue decks, blue green decks that really have really powerful instants and sorceries that can benefit from getting copied or cast for free, if you will. So good card. I like this a lot. I can see this being played in Commander. Nowhere else but Commander. Torpor Orb. 2. For an artifact. Creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. That's a solid sideboard card, honestly. A lot of people are putting Elish Norn in the sideboard against some of these decks in Standard, and they have a lot of EDB effects. Torpor Orb would really be a cheap way to replace Elish Norn. Now, if you have a lot of ETB effects yourself, you would probably still pick Elish Norn because Torpor Orb shuts off yours as well. But if you don't have ETB effects and you notice that Standard has a lot of ETB effects or whichever format you play, then Torpor Orb is a really solid sideboard card to shut that off. Yeah, that's really all that's to say about this card. It's a very simple card, very straightforward. If you don't have a lot of ETB effects in your deck or none at all, and Standard has a lot, keep them in your sideboard because it can really decimate those kinds of decks. Good card. I'm always happy to see hate cards like this printed because it makes sideboarding more interesting. Transmutation Font for 5 mana artifact tap. Create your choice of a blood token, a clue token, or a food token. For 3 mana and tap, sacrifice 3 artifact tokens with different names. Search your library for an artifact card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Activate only as a sorcery. For 5 mana, getting one of those tokens. And then for 3 more mana and tapping, sacrificing 3 artifacts to tutor an artifact and put it on the battlefield. I honestly think that's terrible. It's so slow. There's so many better ways to tutor. Now maybe not in Standard right now. Well, even in Standard, you've got better ways to tutor, and it's just so slow. 8 mana to tutor an artifact and then put on the battlefield. And what artifact is that going to be? That's going to be good enough to make it worth sacrificing 3 artifact tokens with different names, which is a really tricky thing to do. Like, yeah, you have blood, you have clues, foods, treasures, whatever. But still, having 3 different names, sacrificing 3 of those, they have to be tokens. to then find an artifact, put it on the battlefield. That's pretty bad. Now, granted, if you can recur it because transportation font stays on the board, so as long as you have all those tokens, blah blah blah. But still, that's just so much work to get an artifact on the board. There's better ways to tutor. There's better ways to cast stuff for cheap or for free or to cheat them in. Transmutation font just seems really, really bad. I don't see where this is going to get played anywhere. So I hate to say that. I feel like that's a lot with this set. Like there's several cards in this set where I've said that they're just completely unplayable, and these are mythics. You're going to be opening packs, and your mythic slots or your rare mythic slots is going to be one of these totally unplayable cards. Like I'm glad it's not like Aftermath where it's an epilogue set, and it's its own set. But gosh, this set it has some bangers, but this card, yeah, just terrible. Alrighty, we are Fomori Vault. It's a land. Tap for colorless. 3 mana tap. Discard a card. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of artifacts you control. Put one of those cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. So, yeah, so it taps for a colorless, which is all right if you have a lot of artifacts, if you're not in too many colors in your deck. For 3 mana, discarding a card and then looking at the top X of your library. That could be pretty solid if you have a lot of artifacts. It doesn't say non-token artifacts, so if you have clues, blood tokens, treasures, whatever that may be, that might mean that you go pretty deep into your library. Fomori Vault, I kind of wish that Fomori Vault was an artifact land, because then it counted itself. So as of right now, if you play this, it can tap for colors, it doesn't do anything else. You have to have other artifacts on the board for it to even do anything. So and if you have a heavy artifact build, this is pretty good. Discarding like whatever card you don't need in the situation to be able to look pretty deep into your deck if you have a lot of artifacts. That's pretty solid. Um, so for more Evolved, I think it can definitely see play if you have an artifact heavy deck. I don't know what standard's going to bring yet, but standard with all these cards being released might have some pretty decent artifact heavy decks that might want to run for more Evolved. I don't know, for 3 mana, it seems a little slow. But it's also a way to discard cards if you want stuff in your graveyard. So, yeah, if you have artifact decks that want to have artifacts recur from the graveyard, Fomori Vault could be really good. Based on all that, I could see some people try to play this in standard, but this is more of just a commander card in artifact heavy decks. There, it could really shine. Um, but yeah, other than that, this card seems a little slow. It seems like it needs a little too much to have a decent payoff. So yeah, a commander card at best, in my opinion. I don't think you want to play this anywhere else. Tarnation Vista, and this is the last card of the set. It's a land. Tarnation Vista enters the battlefield tapped. As it enters, choose a color. Tap, add 1 mana of the chosen color. For 1 mana and tap, for each color among mono-colored permanents you control, add 1 mana of that color. I hate that it enters tapped. We already have a lot of tapped lands in standard right now. It enters tapped and it's only one color. Like if you're in monocolored and you have a lot of permanents, it kind of has that what do you call it? Devotion effect, if you will. It's kind of like the Nyx kind of thing, where if you tap this and for 1 mana, for each color among monocolored permanents you control, add 1 mana of that color. For each color among mono. No, actually, it doesn't work like Nyx at all. Sorry, I read that wrong. So if you have multiple colors and they're mono-colored permanents, gosh, this card has to do a lot of requirements to make this work. Don't play this card. This card is a trap. If you have a couple monocolored permanents, like let's say you have to have at least 3 to net mana, like positive mana. So you have to have 3 monocolored permanents of different colors. Am I reading that right? Yeah, I think so. For each color among monocolored permanents. So if you have to have at least 3 monocolored permanents for this to net positive mana. Other than that, it's just a tap mana that you can then start tapping for the color of your choice, which is terrible. Yeah, don't play this card. This card is horrible. This is just another one of those cards in this set that's just completely unplayable. So yeah, like I said, this set has a lot of that. It's disappointing, honestly. So Yeah, this was my full set review of Big Score. There are definitely some really cool cards. There are some good cards in this set. I think this set should not have been all Mythics. There's a couple cards that are completely unplayable. And having that take up a Mythic slot in Thunder Outlaws of Thunder Junction packs, it's just going to be such a feels bad. Um, but yeah, there's some cool cards in the set. Please let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about some of the things I've said. If you feel like I'm wrong about some of these cards, please let me know. If there's a card that I said is completely unplayable and you disagree, please let me know why. I can always learn from that. But yeah, there's definitely some mythics in this set that are horrible in my opinion, but there are some that are really cool too. So yeah, I feel a bit lukewarm about the set. If they would have done this like Aftermath, where it's just an epilogue set, nobody would have bought it. It's garbage, honestly. Like the set as a whole, if it would have been released by itself, even at a low price, it's just not a good set. It's kind of garbage. It has some singles that are interesting for Commander players. So when it comes down to that, if you play Commander, there's a couple singles in here that are interesting. Other than that, if this would come out as its own set, nobody would buy it. It is even worse than Aftermath. Aftermath had some good cards. In general, quite a few good cards. This has a few that have potential, but there's also a lot of really bad. So, yeah, that's my opinion on this on Big Score. I still look forward to Outlaws of Thunder Junction. Make sure you check out my ranked top 10 for standard video where I talk about what I believe are going to be the top 10 cards for standard. I really think the set is cool. Big Score, yeah, not so much, but Outlaws of Thunder Junction is great. So let me know what you think. Don't forget to like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter for more takes on Magic the Gathering. Thank you so much for watching.